The man beside the chapel door. Have you forgiven yourself yet, Sarah? The question came from the man sitting beside the chapel door, wrapped in a gray blanket that looked too thin for a London winter. He did not look up when he said her name. He kept his hands around a paper cup of tea, as if it were the last warm thing left in the world. Sarah Bennet stopped with one gloved hand on the brass handle of the tiny station chapel. The great clock above St. Pancras had just struck 11, though the strike had already made time feel useless. Trains were cancelled, taxis were scarce, buses crawled with exhausted crowds, and the platforms below the glass roof had become a restless village of stranded travelers. Sleeping children, wheeled suitcases, damp coats, and voices rising in irritation. She turned slowly. The man's face was half hidden beneath a woolen cap. His beard was streaked with gray. Rainwater clung to the edges of his coat. He sat on a folded cardboard sign that read, in careful blue marker, "A little kindness goes a long way." Beside him lay a canvas bag with a broken zip, a pair of old boots, and a small paperback Bible, its cover softened by years of use. Sarah tightened her grip on her briefcase. "Excuse me." Only then did he look up. His eyes were clear, not pleading, not accusatory. They were the sort of eyes Sarah had seen once in an old church window in York when sunlight fell through painted glass. Tired, but lit from somewhere behind the tiredness. "I asked," he said gently, "whether you have forgiven yourself yet." Sarah glanced around. A woman in a navy coat hurried past, dragging a suitcase. A teenager leaned against a vending machine, headphones on, eyes half closed. Two railway staff members argued with a man who insisted his ticket entitled him to some kind of compensation tonight. Nobody seemed to notice Sarah, or the homeless man, or the fact that he had spoken her name. "Do I know you?" she asked. "Not properly." "That is not an answer. It is the honest one." Sarah's barrister face came on before she could stop it. Polite, cold, polished by years of courtrooms and boardrooms. "I don't know who told you my name, but I am not in the mood for street theater." "No," he said. "I suppose you wouldn't be." She should have walked away. She had walked away from men like him hundreds of times, not always out of cruelty, often out of fear, sometimes simply because London taught its busy people to look past need if they wanted to reach appointments on time. But his voice had found a hairline crack under her ribs. "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" She had spent 4 years making sure no one asked that question, least of all her. "My train was cancelled," she said, hearing the absurdity of explaining herself to a stranger. "I need somewhere quiet to make a call." He nodded toward the chapel door. "Then you're in the right place." Sarah looked at the small sign beside the entrance. "The Chapel of St. Michael. Open for prayer. Emergency shelter tonight because of the strike. Volunteers needed." She had passed this chapel many times without entering. She remembered it mostly as an inconvenient doorway near the side corridor, a pocket of silence hidden inside the machinery of arrivals and departures. Once, years ago, her mother had asked whether they might step in for 5 minutes before catching a train to Edinburgh. Sarah had been 26, already wearing heels too high for comfort and ambition too bright for tenderness. She had rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, I'm not a child anymore." Her mother had answered, "That isn't why people pray." Sarah swallowed and pushed the door open. Warm air touched her face first, then the smell of candle wax, wet wool, old hymn books, and instant coffee. The chapel was smaller than she expected. Stone walls, a wooden crucifix, a row of candles burning in red glass cups, and perhaps 20 folding chairs pushed aside to make space for mats and blankets. A handful of stranded travelers sat along one wall, sipping soup from paper bowls. A young mother tried to settle a little boy who would not stop asking when the train would come. Near the altar, an elderly priest in a brown cardigan moved slowly but steadily, handing out clean socks from a plastic storage box. No one asked Sarah why she had come in. That somehow was worse. She stood near the back, still in her charcoal suit and camel coat, her leather briefcase pressed against her leg like a shield. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. 11 missed messages. 2 from the firm's managing partner. 1 from her assistant, Clara. 3 from the client. 1 from her brother Michael, which she ignored. 4 from an unknown number. She opened the latest message from work. Sarah, call me immediately. The board is meeting at 7 a.m. If the Holloway file issue is what I think it is, we need to control the exposure before it escalates. Her mouth went dry. The Holloway file. The name alone could empty a room inside her. She locked the phone without answering and looked for somewhere to sit. Every chair seemed occupied by someone with more visible need than she had. A man in a fluorescent railway vest was asleep with his chin on his chest. A student with red hair was charging her phone beside a pillar. An elderly couple shared a blanket and whispered over a crossword. Sarah remained standing. The priest noticed her. "You look as though you were trying to decide whether to stay or run," he said. His voice held a faint Irish lilt. His hair was white, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes were lively. "I only need a quiet place for a moment," Sarah said. "Most of us do. I'm not here to take anything." "Then perhaps you've come to give something." Sarah almost laughed. "I don't think I'm the kind of person you're looking for tonight, Father." "Father Matthew," he said. "And none of us are quite the kind of person anyone is looking for. That's why grace has such a wide door." It was the kind of sentence Sarah would usually dismiss as sentimental, but the chapel softened things. Or perhaps exhaustion did. She had spent the day in a glass conference room on the 34th floor of a building in Canary Wharf, defending a position she no longer believed in to people who seemed to have forgotten that documents had consequences and numbers could wound. Then the strike had locked the city in place. Her usual driver had been unable to cross town. Her phone battery had dropped to 13%. Her carefully scheduled life had collapsed into delays, closed gates, shouted announcements, and the question of a homeless stranger beside a chapel door. "Do you need help here?" she asked, surprising herself. Father Matthew's eyebrows lifted. "I mean," she added quickly, "I have some time before I can get home." "Everyone here had somewhere else to be," he said. "That may be why we are useful to one another. There are sandwiches in the back room. Tea as well. If you can make tea without starting a small fire, you are qualified. I can read merger agreements at 2 in the morning. That sounds more dangerous than tea." She took off her gloves. In the back room, a woman named Nora showed her where the cups were. Nora was a nurse at St. Bartholomew's, stranded after a double shift, and somehow still kind enough to keep moving. Her gray hair was tied in a knot, and her trainers squeaked on the tiled floor. "Milk goes on the left, sugar on the right," Nora said. "Biscuits are for everyone, but hide one packet for the children or the businessmen will eat them all before midnight. You'd be amazed how quickly civilization collapses around chocolate digestives." Sarah gave a small smile. "There we are," Nora said. "You do have a face under all that lawyering." Sarah looked at her sharply. "What makes you think I'm a lawyer?" "The shoes. The exhaustion. The way you're holding your shoulders as if apologizing would cost money." Sarah almost replied with something efficient and cutting. Instead, she poured hot water into 6 cups and said nothing. For the next hour, she made tea. It was a humble task, and she did it badly at first. She overfilled cups. She forgot sugar. She handed one man peppermint tea when he had asked for ordinary. Yet nobody treated her mistakes as evidence of professional failure. People said thank you. They warmed their hands around cups. They took what was offered and became, for a few minutes, less alone. Near midnight, the man from the doorway came inside. He removed his cap and shook rain from it with quiet care. Without the shadow of the doorway, Sarah saw that he was older than she first thought, perhaps 60, perhaps younger but worn by cold and disappointment. There was a scar near his left eyebrow and a small wooden cross tied around his wrist with black thread. He did not come to her. He went straight to Father Matthew and helped stack empty bowls. Sarah watched him while pretending not to. Nora noticed. "That's Daniel," she said. Daniel who? Just Daniel. He helps when we open the chapel as shelter. He's homeless. He is. And he helps. Nora poured soup into a pot. Being poor doesn't mean a person has nothing to give. Sarah flushed, though Nora had not spoken sharply. I didn't mean. I know what you meant. We all mean things before we know what we mean. Daniel looked up then, and for one unsettling moment his eyes met Sarah's across the room. He nodded once, not triumphantly, not knowingly, simply acknowledging that she existed. Then he returned to the bowls. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Clara. Please call. Mark is saying the omission was junior review error. I know that is not true. I do not know what to do. Sarah closed her eyes. The Holloway file had started 4 years earlier with a client named Thomas Holloway, a small manufacturer from Kent whose company had been swallowed by a larger corporation after a contract dispute Sarah's firm had handled. Thomas was not rich by the standards of Sarah's clients. He was stubborn, decent, proud of paying his employees on time and remembering their children's names. He had trusted the firm because a friend told him they were the best in London. Sarah had been younger then, recently promoted, desperate to prove she could run a high-stakes case without supervision. The case turned on a disclosure deadline and a technical indemnity clause hidden in years of correspondence. Sarah had found the clause late one Friday night. If presented properly, it could have strengthened Holloway's position. But another bigger client had demanded her attention. A partner had pushed her to move fast. She had delegated the final review to a junior associate, then failed to check whether the clause was included in the bundle. It was not. The settlement that followed ruined Holloway's business. Sarah told herself the loss was not entirely her fault. The market had been against him. The other side had deeper pockets. The judge had hinted at difficulties. There were always difficulties. In law, there were always enough difficulties to hide behind. Then Thomas Holloway died the following winter. Heart attack, people said. Stress, his wife had written once in an email Sarah never answered. She had read the message at her desk with a half-eaten salad beside her laptop and felt, for 1 second, as though the city had tilted. Then she filed the email, told herself professional boundaries mattered, and worked until midnight on a corporate acquisition that made the firm more money than Holloway would have made in 5 lifetimes. For years past, Sarah became partner. She bought a flat in Clerkenwell with white walls and no photographs. She learned to speak in calm, exact sentences. She sent expensive flowers when her mother died but arrived late to the hospital because of a closing meeting. She attended church at Christmas if a client invited her. She gave to charity by standing order. She made sure guilt never had enough silence to speak. Until now, the Holloway file had surfaced again because his widow had found old emails. A journalist had started asking questions. There was evidence the omission had not been a junior mistake. Sarah's signature was on the final review certificate. Her assistant Clara had found archived notes showing Sarah knew about the clause before the filing deadline. The firm wanted to control exposure. That phrase had been used in 3 messages already. Control exposure. As if truth were smoke from a kitchen fire and not a body pulled from a river. Sarah put the phone face down on the counter. Bad news? Nora asked. Work. That can be bad news. Sarah began washing cups. It usually is. Nora leaned against the sink. You don't have to tell me anything. But you look like someone carrying a suitcase without handles. I'm fine. My late husband used to say that when he was bleeding into his socks. Sarah gave a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob, and hated that Nora heard it. Father Matthew called from the chapel. Sarah, would you mind helping Daniel bring in the extra blankets from the storage cupboard? It sticks in cold weather. She stiffened. Of course. Daniel was waiting by a narrow corridor lined with old parish notices and framed photographs of the station chapel through the decades. In one, soldiers stood outside in uniform during the Second World War. In another, railway workers held mugs of tea in the 1970s. Beneath the photos was a wooden plaque. Lord, Make this place a shelter for the weary and a lamp for the lost. Daniel had a torch. Storage is through here, he said. His voice did not carry the strange weight it had outside. He sounded ordinary now, a little hoarse, polite. Sarah followed him down the corridor, past a door marked vestry, then through another into a colder passage beneath the stairs. "How did you know my name?" she asked. "Father Matthew said it." "No, you said it before I spoke to him." Daniel stopped at a metal door. "Did I?" "Yes." He tried a key. It did not turn. Old locks are like old hearts. They resist being opened, but mostly out of fear. "Please don't do that." He looked at her. "Don't turn everything into a parable," she said. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Fair enough." He tried the key again. This time the lock clicked. Inside were shelves of blankets, folding camp beds, crates of bottled water, and boxes labeled with careful marker. Socks, toothbrushes, baby wipes, hymn books. The air smelled of dust and lavender laundry powder. Sarah picked up a stack of blankets. Daniel took another. For a while they worked in silence. Footsteps thudded overhead as people shifted in the chapel. Somewhere a child coughed. Rain tapped the high window in the storage room like impatient fingers. As Daniel reached for another blanket, his sleeve fell back, revealing a small tattoo on his wrist, the outline of a sparrow. Sarah noticed before she could stop herself. "My daughter chose that," Daniel said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stare. People stare at worse things." "You have a daughter?" Have. Depends on whether one speaks by earth or by heaven." Sarah said nothing. "Her name was Emily," he continued. "She liked small birds because she said God must be tender if he bothered to count them." The words brushed against Sarah's memory. Her mother, reading by a kitchen window in Leeds, saying, "Not one sparrow falls without the Father seeing." Sarah had been studying for exams then, irritated by tenderness. She had asked whether God also watched interest rates and court deadlines. Her mother had only smiled. "How did she die?" Sarah asked quietly. Daniel did not answer at once. "Pneumonia," he said. "Complications. She was 19. I'm sorry. So am I." There was something in the way he said it that told Sarah grief had not been the only wound. He stacked blankets on a trolley. "After she died, I left my wife in all the ways a man can leave before he walks out of the door. Then I walked out of the door. Drink helped for a while. Then it stopped helping and became another door I could not open. I lost work, lost rooms, lost people's patience. After a few years, I became what most people see before they cross the street." Sarah pushed the trolley toward the corridor. "And now you help in a chapel." "Now I help in a chapel." "Why?" He thought about it as if the answer mattered. "Because Christ found me when I had become very skilled at hiding from everyone else." The corridor seemed narrower suddenly. Sarah forced a professional tone. "That sounds convenient." It was inconvenient. He asked me to forgive people I wanted to hate. He asked me to ask forgiveness from people I had hurt. He asked me to live when I had made peace with disappearing. She looked away. Daniel added softly, "Mercy is not a warm blanket at first. Sometimes it is the hand that pulls the knife from your grip." They returned to the chapel with the blankets. A little girl in a pink coat had fallen asleep on 2 chairs pushed together, her face sticky with tears. Sarah placed a blanket over her. The girl stirred, caught Sarah's hand without waking, and held it for 3 seconds before letting go. The small trust of that hand nearly undid her. At 1 in the morning, the station announced another round of cancellations. A groan rose from the platforms beyond the chapel walls. Someone inside cursed under his breath. Father Matthew asked everyone to settle in for the night if they needed to, then stood near the altar and spoke not as if he were performing a service, but as if he were speaking to neighbors around a kitchen table. "Some of you did not expect to sleep in a chapel tonight," he said. "Some of you are angry. Some are frightened. Some simply want mourning. I won't give a sermon. I'll only say this. There is a line in the Gospel where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens." That invitation was not given only to the respectable weary. It was not given only to people who can explain how they became burdened. It is for all who come. Sarah stared at the floor. Father Matthew nodded to Nora, who began humming a hymn Sarah knew from childhood. Soon a few others joined. The melody was quiet, uneven, human. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Sarah did not sing. She stood at the back and felt the words move through the room like a hand passing over bruised places. When the hymn ended, people settled into blankets and chairs. Lights dimmed. The chapel became a landscape of sleeping shapes. Sarah could not sleep. She sat on a bench near the side wall, phone in hand, reading Clara's message again and again. "I know that is not true. I do not know what to do." Sarah had hired Clara 2 years earlier because the young woman was brilliant, careful, and still believed the law was supposed to protect people. Sarah had liked her immediately and therefore kept her at a distance. It was safer not to be responsible for another person's idealism. Now the firm seemed ready to place the Holloway blame on Clara's review team. The story would be neat. A junior oversight. A regrettable administrative error. No partner misconduct. No public confession. No threat to Sarah's seat on the executive committee. No collapse of the reputation she had built brick by brick over the grave of her conscience. Her thumb hovered over Clara's number. Instead, she opened the message from her brother. "Mum's birthday tomorrow. I know you're busy. I'm putting flowers at the churchyard around noon. You're welcome to come." Sarah locked the phone. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, had died 3 years earlier on a rainy Tuesday in March. She had spent 30 years teaching primary school children to read, then her last 6 months teaching her daughter how not to run from weakness. Sarah had not learned. She had visited between meetings, answered emails in hospital corridors, and once told her mother, "Please don't make me feel guilty for having responsibilities." Her mother had said, "I don't want you guilty, love. I want you free." At the funeral, Father Andrew from their parish had spoken of forgiveness. But Sarah remembered only Michael refusing to look at her in the churchyard. Later he had said, "She kept asking for you." Sarah replied, "I was there as much as I could be." He said, "No, you were present as much as you could be. That isn't the same." They had barely spoken since. The chapel door opened. Cold air slid in. Daniel stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind him. He carried 2 paper cups. He crossed to Sarah and offered one. "Tea," he said. "No parable." She took it. He sat at the other end of the bench, leaving enough space that she did not feel trapped. For a few minutes they drank tea. Finally Sarah said, "I made a mistake once." Daniel looked at the crucifix, not at her. "Most of us have." "No. Not like this. That is what most of us think." She almost snapped at him, but exhaustion had worn down her defenses. "I was responsible for a legal file. A man trusted us. Trusted me. I missed something, or I saw it and did not give it enough weight. I don't know anymore. I tell myself different versions depending on how much sleep I've had." He lost his company. Then he died. Daniel's face remained still, but Sarah saw the sadness enter his eyes. "His widow wrote to me," she continued. "I ignored the email. I told myself it was inappropriate to respond personally. That was the phrase I used. Inappropriate. As if compassion were a breach of procedure." Her voice trembled. She steadied it. "Now the file has come up again. My firm may blame someone else. A junior lawyer. She doesn't deserve it. I can stop that by telling the truth." "And will you?" Sarah laughed once, bitterly. "If I do, I may lose everything." Daniel held the cup between both hands. "What is everything?" "My partnership. My reputation. My future. Those are large things. They are not nothing." "No. You think I should confess because it makes a better story. I think stories become true at the point where someone chooses." She turned toward him. Do you know what it is like to build a life because the old one hurt too much? To become excellent because being ordinary meant being powerless? To work until there is no room for memory? People admire success. They do not ask what it is covering. Daniel nodded slowly. I know what it is like to build a ruin and call it shelter. The words landed without force, but she felt them. I can't fix what happened, Sarah said. No. I can't bring him back. No. Then what good does confession do? Daniel looked at her then. It tells the living they are not crazy for knowing the truth. It tells the dead they were not forgotten. It tells your own soul the hiding is over. Sarah looked down at the tea. The surface trembled slightly in her hand. What if Christ's mercy is not for people who should have known better? Daniel's answer came quietly. Then none of us are saved. She closed her eyes. He continued. I used to think mercy meant God saying my sins did not matter. That made me angry because my sins mattered very much. I hurt people. I abandoned my wife in her grief. I frightened my son when he tried to help me. I stole money from a friend. I lied in rooms where people were trying to save my life. If mercy meant calling those things small, I wanted none of it. But that is not what Christ did. What did he do? Sarah whispered. He carried the truth all the way to the cross. He did not look away from sin. He entered the place where it had done its worst, and he opened a door there. Sarah pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Daniel's voice softened. Mercy does not erase responsibility, Sarah. It gives us strength to carry it without being destroyed. The chapel was very quiet. Somewhere outside, another announcement echoed through the station, blurred by stone and glass. Sarah could not make out the words. It sounded like the sea. How do you know my name? She asked again, but this time without accusation. Daniel looked toward the candles. When Father Matthew prays for people, he sometimes says names aloud. Last week he prayed for a woman named Sarah Bennett, though I did not know who she was. He said an old friend from Leeds had asked prayers for her. Sarah stared at him. My mother's church, she said. Maybe. She's dead. Love keeps asking after us. The tears came before she could prevent them. She turned away quickly, but Daniel did not pretend not to see. He also did not move closer, which somehow made his kindness easier to bear. Sarah cried silently, shoulders shaking, one hand over her eyes. She cried for Thomas Holloway, for his widow, for Clara, for her mother waiting in hospital rooms while Sarah sent emails, for Michael's hurt, for the years of cold competence, for the little girl asleep under a chapel blanket, for the question at the door, have you forgiven yourself yet? When the first wave passed, Daniel handed her a folded napkin. It was rough and cheap and exactly enough. I don't know how to begin, she said. Begin with the next true thing. What is that? You know? She did. At 2:17 a.m., sitting on a wooden bench beneath a stained glass window of Christ calming the storm, Sarah Bennett called Clara. Clara answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleeplessness. Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late. I was awake. I know. There was silence. Sarah looked at Daniel. He lowered his eyes and gave her privacy without leaving. Clara, Sarah said, you are not responsible for the Holloway omission. A small breath came through the phone. I know, Clara said. I am. The words did not kill her. They felt as though they might, but they did not. Sarah continued before fear returned. I found the indemnity clause before filing. I failed to ensure it was included. I certified review. I did not disclose that failure afterward. I allowed the narrative to become vague because vagueness protected me. Clara was crying now softly. I'm so sorry, Sarah said. I should have told the truth years ago. I will tell it at the board meeting in the morning. I will put it in writing before then. I will make clear that you and your team are not to be blamed. Sarah, they'll come after you. Yes. The firm will try to contain it. I know. They may ask you to resign. Yes. Are you sure? Sarah looked at the crucifix. The figure of Christ was carved simply, head bowed, arms open, wounds visible. Not erased, transformed into invitation. "No," Sarah said honestly, "but I'm going to do it." Clara whispered, "Thank you." Sarah almost said, "Don't thank me." Instead she said, "I should have protected you before tonight." When the call ended, she opened her email. Her hands shook as she typed, but the words came with terrible clarity. She wrote to Mark Ellis, managing partner, copied Clara, the ethics committee, and the firm's general counsel. She set out the facts. She attached the archive notes. She accepted responsibility. She requested that no junior lawyer be named or disciplined for the omission. She asked that the firm notify Mrs. Holloway and take steps toward restitution. She read it 3 times. Then she sent it. The small whoosh of the email leaving felt louder than any station announcement. For several minutes she sat completely still. Then she began to laugh. Not happily. Not wildly. It was the laugh of someone who had spent years holding a door shut and finally stepped aside to let the wind come through. Daniel smiled. "Next true thing," he said. Sarah wiped her face. "I hate that phrase." "You may hate it all the way into freedom." She shook her head, but the shaking was gentler now. Toward 3, Father Matthew found her still sitting on the bench. "You look different," he said. "I may have just ended my career." He nodded as if she had said she had put the kettle on. "And how is your soul?" She thought about lying. Then she said, "Terrified, but less numb." "That is not a bad beginning." "Father, did someone from Leeds ask you to pray for me?" He frowned thoughtfully. "Let me think. A woman wrote to the chapel 2 weeks ago. She said she used to bring her daughter through this station years ago, when the daughter was studying law in London. She asked whether we might pray for her daughter, Sarah. There was a donation included for shelter supplies." Sarah's breath caught. "What was her name?" "I'm not sure. The letter is in my office. My mother is dead." Father Matthew looked at her carefully. "This letter was from a Margaret Bennett Memorial Fund. Perhaps your brother, Michael." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest. "My brother," she said. "Ah, he never told me." Sometimes prayer travels where conversation cannot. Father Matthew rested a hand on the back of the bench. "Would you like me to pray with you?" Sarah had refused that question in many forms for years. At hospital beds, after funerals, at Christmas services when candles made everyone sentimental. She had refused because prayer seemed to require innocence, and Sarah had misplaced her somewhere between ambition and fear. But in the chapel that night, among sleeping strangers and the smell of tea, she found she had no strength left to perform disbelief. "Yes," she said, "but I don't know how." "That is all right. Most of us begin there." He sat beside her, leaving space, as Daniel had. He did not use grand language. He thanked Christ for seeing Sarah fully and loving her still. He asked for courage to tell the truth, humility to accept consequences, wisdom to make restitution, and grace to believe that the mercy of Jesus was stronger than shame. When he prayed for Thomas Holloway and his family, Sarah wept again. But this time the tears felt less like drowning and more like thawing. At 4 in the morning, the chapel was almost still. Nora slept upright in a chair with her arms folded. The little girl in the pink coat muttered in dreams. Daniel sat near the door, reading from the worn Bible by the dim light of a wall lamp. Sarah lay on a mat with her coat folded under her head. She did not sleep exactly, but drifted through memories. Her mother in a yellow raincoat, waving from a platform. Thomas Holloway shaking her hand after their first meeting, saying, "I'm glad you're on our side." Clara at her desk, eyes bright with first-year hope. Michael at the grave, shoulders bent. A hymn moving through candlelight. A man beside a chapel door asking the only question she had spent years avoiding. When morning came, it came gray and cold. Station lights glowed against misted glass. The strike continued in partial chaos, but a few services had resumed. People folded blankets. Children complained about breakfast. A businessman who had been rude at midnight quietly stacked chairs without being asked. Nora distributed porridge cups from a delivery someone had donated. Father Matthew moved among everyone with the steady cheerfulness of a man who had seen many bad nights fail to defeat the morning. Sarah checked her phone. 26 new emails. 9 missed calls. Mark had written in capital letters, then in legal caution, then finally, "We need you at the office by 8. Do not speak to anyone externally." Clara had sent only one message. "I am with you." Michael had texted too. "I don't know why, but I woke early and felt I should tell you Mum loved you. I'm still going at noon. Come if you can." Sarah read it twice, then typed, "I'll try. I'm sorry, Michael. For more than today." She stared at the message, then sent it before she could make it more polished and less true. Daniel was outside the chapel door when she stepped into the station corridor. He had returned to his folded cardboard sign, though now he had a fresh scarf around his neck. The crowds moved past him in the morning rush, already restored to the London habit of urgency. "You're going?" he asked. "Yes." "To tell the truth?" "Yes." "Good. I'm afraid. That does not make it less good." She studied him. "What will you do?" He looked amused. "Today? Help Father Matthew clean. Find breakfast. Try not to get rained on. Perhaps call my son." "Your son?" He nodded. "Next true thing." Sarah smiled faintly. "I still hate that phrase." "I know." She opened her briefcase and took out a business card, then hesitated. "I don't want to insult you. You're wondering whether giving me a card is kindness or conscience." "Yes. It can be both. Most things are mixed when they leave us. Christ can still use them." She handed him the card. "If you ever need legal help, call me. I mean it. If I still have an office after today." He took it carefully, as if accepting something heavier than paper. "And if I don't," she said, "call anyway." He tucked it into his Bible. "Sarah." She looked back. "You asked whether you can forgive yourself." "No. You asked." He smiled. "Then I'll answer what you did not ask. Forgiving yourself does not mean declaring yourself innocent. It means agreeing with God that your sin is not more powerful than His mercy." She stood very still. "Go well," Daniel said. Sarah walked into the morning. The office tower in Canary Wharf looked different when she arrived. It had always seemed to her like a monument to achievement. Glass, steel, height, reflection. That morning it looked more like a mirror, and Sarah did not entirely like what it reflected. She rode the lift to the 34th floor with 2 analysts who spoke nervously about transport delays. Neither knew that the woman beside them had slept in a station chapel and confessed professional misconduct before dawn. The reception area smelled of coffee and polished stone. Clara was waiting near the conference room, pale but composed. When she saw Sarah, something in her face trembled. "Are you all right?" Clara asked. "No," Sarah said. "But I'm here." Mark Ellis arrived seconds later, silver-haired, immaculate, carrying anger beneath courtesy. "Sarah, my office. Now. The board meeting is in 10 minutes, she said. "My office first." "No," Sarah replied. Her voice was quiet, but something had settled underneath it. "The facts concern the board and the ethics committee. I will speak in the meeting." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Do not make this worse. I made it worse 4 years ago." Clara looked down. Mark lowered his voice. "You are emotional." "Yes. That is not helpful. It may be the first helpful thing I've been in this matter." For a moment, Mark seemed not to recognize her. Sarah understood. She hardly recognized herself. The boardroom filled slowly. Partners with guarded faces, general counsel with a stack of printed emails, a representative from Risk, 2 external advisors joining by video. Sarah sat at the end of the table, not in her usual place near Mark. Clara sat behind her. Through the glass wall, London continued as if nothing sacred or terrible could happen before 9 on a Wednesday. Mark began with language Sarah knew well. We are here to assess a potential historical file management issue relating to Holloway manufacturing and to determine appropriate internal and external response. Sarah listened for 30 seconds, then interrupted. It was not a file management issue. Every face turned. It was my failure, she said. Mark's jaw tightened. Sarah, we have your written statement. I want to say it aloud. General Counsel leaned back. Proceed. Sarah placed both hands flat on the table. In March 4 years ago, I identified correspondence relevant to the indemnity clause in the Holloway matter. I failed to ensure that correspondence was included in the final review bundle. I certified the review. The omission weakened Mr. Holloway's position and contributed to the settlement pressure. After Mr. Holloway's death, when Mrs. Holloway wrote to me, I did not respond. I allowed ambiguity about responsibility to remain because it protected me and the firm. Any suggestion that the omission was caused by Clara Whitmore or another junior member of the review team is false. The room was silent. One of the external advisors cleared his throat. You understand the seriousness of what you are saying? Yes. You understand the potential regulatory implications? Yes. You understand this may require notification to the client's estate? Yes. It should. Mark spoke through his teeth. Sarah, you are characterizing a complex matter in a way that may not be legally necessary. She looked at him. Necessary for whom? The question hung there. Mark did not answer. Sarah continued. I am prepared to cooperate fully with any internal, regulatory, or external review. I am also asking the firm to make restitution to Mrs. Holloway. Financially, yes, but not only financially. We owe her the truth. A partner named Eleanor Price, who had been with the firm longer than anyone, looked at Sarah over her glasses. Why now? Sarah had prepared many possible answers in the lift. Ethical obligation, new evidence, reputational risk. They were all true and insufficient. Because I spent the night in a chapel, she said. A few eyes shifted. Mark closed his. Sarah almost smiled at the absurdity of it. And because a man who had nothing asked me the question I should have asked myself years ago. No one spoke. Eleanor nodded once, slowly. Then let us discuss what truth requires. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It was brutal in the way professional rooms can be brutal without raised voices. Words like exposure, breach, liability, notification, negligence, resignation, and privilege moved around the table. Sarah answered questions. When she did not know, she said so. When she was tempted to soften, she remembered Daniel's phrase. The next true thing. She did not become heroic. She became honest in pieces, one answer at a time. By noon, she had agreed to step down from 2 client matters pending review. By 1, the firm had appointed external counsel. By 2, Mark had stopped looking at her entirely. By 3, Clara found her in the corridor and hugged her without asking permission. Sarah froze, then hugged her back. I was so angry with you, Clara whispered. You should be. I still am. I know. But thank you. Sarah closed her eyes. I'm sorry. This time the words did not feel like strategy. They felt small and therefore real. At 3:30, Sarah left the office and took the Underground North, then a train, then a taxi to the small churchyard where her mother was buried. The transport strike still snarled the city, but she moved through it without the old fury. Delay no longer felt like theft. It felt, strangely, like room. Michael was sitting on a bench near their mother's grave, a bunch of daffodils beside him. He looked older than she remembered, though perhaps grief had aged them both in separate mirrors. He stood when he saw her. I didn't think you'd come, he said. Neither did I. They stood awkwardly. The churchyard smelled of wet grass and stone. A robin hopped along the low wall. Sarah nearly laughed at the sight of it. A small bird counted. Michael placed the daffodils in the vase by the headstone. Margaret Ellen Bennett. Beloved mother, teacher, friend. Underneath, a verse. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I got your message, he said. I meant it. He put his hands in his coat pockets. For what part? For being absent when Mum was dying. For making you carry what I refused to carry. For acting as if work were a law of nature and love were an interruption. Michael looked away. Sarah continued, voice shaking. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I don't deserve it on demand. But I wanted to tell the truth. He was quiet a long time. Mum never stopped defending you, he said. It drove me mad. Sarah smiled through tears. That sounds like her. She'd say, Sarah is frightened, not cruel. I told her there comes a point where frightened people do cruel things. She was right, Sarah said. So were you. Michael's eyes filled. He wiped them angrily. I missed you. That's what made me furious. Not just that you weren't there. That I needed my sister and you had become someone I had to make appointments with. The sentence pierced her more cleanly than accusation. I don't know how to come back, she said. He looked at the grave. Start by having tea with me. When? Now, before you find a way to turn it into a quarterly objective. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Michael put an arm around her shoulders, stiffly at first, then with the old familiar pressure of childhood. They stood together in the damp churchyard while the sky slowly cleared. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life did not become easy. Truth did not rearrange consequences into comfort. The firm entered negotiations with Mrs. Holloway's solicitors. The regulator opened an inquiry. Sarah stepped back from partnership duties. Some colleagues treated her with careful sympathy. Others avoided her as though failure were contagious. Mark spoke to her only when necessary. The legal press eventually learned there was an investigation, though not all details became public at once. Sarah had days when she woke with dread sitting on her chest like a stone. On those mornings, she remembered that mercy did not make responsibility vanish. She got up anyway. She wrote to Mrs. Holloway by hand before the formal letter was sent. It took her 6 attempts. The final version was not long. It did not defend. It did not explain pressure or workload or complexity. It said, I failed your husband. I failed you. I am deeply sorry. You deserved the truth years ago. I cannot undo what happened, but I will cooperate fully in making restitution. Mrs. Holloway did not reply for 18 days. When she did, the letter contained only 3 lines. I have hated you for a long time. I am not ready to stop. But thank you for telling the truth. Sarah read it in her kitchen and sat on the floor because the chair seemed too far away. She did not feel absolved. She felt addressed. That was harder and better. She began going to the station chapel on Thursday evenings. At first she told herself she was only there to discuss legal support for the shelter. Then she made tea. Then she helped Nora sort donations. Then she stayed for the short prayer service Father Matthew held at 9, where commuters, cleaners, rough sleepers, students, and railway staff sometimes sat together under the same small cross. Daniel was there most weeks. Sometimes he was sober and steady. Sometimes he was tired and withdrawn. Once he disappeared for 10 days, and Sarah found herself worrying with an ache she recognized as prayer before she had words for it. When he returned, thinner and ashamed, Father Matthew embraced him without performance. Sarah handed him tea and said only, I'm glad you're here. Daniel nodded as if the words cost him and saved him at the same time. He did call his son. The first call lasted 4 minutes. The second lasted 11. By spring, they met for coffee in a place near Euston. Daniel told Sarah afterward that his son had a beard now and 2 children, one of whom liked birds. He cried when he said it. Sarah did not try to fix the tears. At the firm, Clara began spending 1 afternoon a week with Sarah researching pro bono cases connected to debt, housing, and small business disputes. At first, the arrangement was unofficial. Then Eleanor Price, to Sarah's surprise, asked for a proposal. We cannot polish the firm's conscience with charity, Eleanor said. No, Sarah replied, but we can still do good work. Yes. Then write something useful. Sarah wrote the proposal. Not glossy. Not sentimental. A practical clinic for people crushed by legal processes designed for those who could afford endurance. Tenants, small employers, families facing debt, workers misclassified by companies with clever contracts. She named it the Holloway Access Project, but only after Mrs. Holloway gave permission. The first clinic opened in a church hall in Camden on a wet April evening. The heating failed. The printer jammed. A volunteer brought the wrong forms. Sarah spent 40 minutes helping a man understand a debt letter he had been too frightened to open. When he finally understood that he had options, his shoulders dropped 2 inches. "I thought I was finished," he said. Sarah thought of Thomas Holloway. Not yet. Afterward, she walked back to the station with Clara. "You're different now," Clara said. Sarah looked at the rain shining on the pavement. "Am I?" "Yes. Still terrifying. But warmer. I'll accept that as progress." "It is." Sarah's inquiry did not end neatly. She received a formal reprimand and a financial penalty. She lost her executive committee position. For a while, she thought she would lose partnership entirely. In the end, after restitution was agreed and Mrs. Holloway declined to push for further personal sanction, the firm allowed Sarah to remain in a reduced role under supervision. Some said she had been spared because she was valuable. Some said the firm feared more scrutiny. Some said grace in professional language looked like negotiated settlement. Sarah did not pretend the outcome was pure. Human justice rarely came unmixed. But she accepted the humiliation that belonged to her and refused the shame that tried to become her name. On the first anniversary of the transportation strike, Sarah returned to the station chapel with flowers. Not expensive ones. Daffodils, because Michael said their mother would approve. London was not on strike that night. Trains ran. People hurried. The chapel was quiet except for a cleaner humming near the back. Father Matthew was lighting candles. "A year," he said when he saw her. "A year. You look well. I look tired." "That too." She placed the daffodils near the small side table where prayer requests were kept. "Is Daniel here?" Father Matthew's expression changed. Not into sorrow exactly, but into tenderness. "He's in Birmingham this week, visiting his son." Sarah smiled. "He asked me to give you something if you came." Father Matthew took a small envelope from the office. On the front, in careful blue handwriting, was her name. Inside was a card with a sparrow drawn in ink. Beneath it Daniel had written, "Sarah, I used to think doors were only for people with keys. That night you opened one for me too. I called my son because you went to tell the truth. Grace travels strangely. Keep going. The next true thing. Daniel." Sarah pressed the card to her chest and laughed softly through tears. Father Matthew pretended to rearrange him books. She sat in the same bench where she had made the call to Clara. The chapel smelled as it had that night. Wax, wood, old paper, tea. Outside, the station breathed with departures and arrivals. A young couple hurried past the chapel door, arguing about tickets. A railway worker leaned in briefly, crossed himself, and left. A woman with a suitcase came inside, sat in the back row, and covered her face with both hands. Sarah looked at her for a moment. Then she rose, went to the small counter, and made 2 cups of tea. She carried one to the woman and held it out. The woman looked up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't usually do this." "Neither did I," Sarah said. The woman took the tea. For a few minutes they sat without speaking. At last the woman whispered, "I don't know how to fix what I've done." Sarah looked toward the crucifix, at the carved hands open in suffering and welcome. "No," she said gently. "Most of the time we don't. But there is a place to begin." The woman wiped her face. "Where?" Sarah thought of a homeless man beside the chapel door, of her mother's prayers, of Thomas Holloway's name finally spoken truthfully, of Clara's trembling hug, of Michael's arm around her in the churchyard, of Daniel calling his son, of Christ, who did not erase wounds but made even wounds speak mercy. She handed the woman a napkin, rough and cheap and exactly enough. "With the next true thing," Sarah said. Outside, under the high glass roof of the station, trains departed into the night. Some were late, some were crowded, some carried people home after years of not knowing how to return. In the small chapel by the corridor, candles burned steadily in red glass cups, each flame trembling but not going out. Sarah sat beside a stranger and listened, and for the first time in many years, she no longer felt that forgiveness was a door meant for other people. She knew now that it was a door Christ held open from the wounded side of love, not so the guilty could escape responsibility, but so the weary could find strength to carry it honestly. She had not forgiven herself in the shallow way she once imagined, by pretending the past had become harmless. The past still mattered. Thomas Holloway still mattered. Her mother's empty chair still mattered. Clara's fear still mattered. Michael's loneliness still mattered. The consequences still mattered. But mercy mattered more. Not because it made the wrong smaller, but because it made love stronger. And as the chapel settled into its quiet rhythm of prayer, footsteps, tea, and candlelight, Sarah Bennett bowed her head and whispered a prayer that was less polished than any argument she had ever made and more truthful than any statement she had ever signed. "Lord Jesus," she said, "help me keep going." No thunder answered. No glass shook. No angel appeared beside the door. Only the candle flame moved, small and bright in the breathing dark, and somewhere beyond the chapel walls a train began to move, slowly at first, then steadily, carrying its passengers through the night toward morning.